Good morning, everyone. For those of you who have been coming to our services for any period of time, you know that many of us were taught by Swami Kriyananda, and he often said, make sure you start your talk or your sermon or whatever it is with a joke. And as I've said, he would often tell a joke that had nothing to do with anything that he was about to talk about, just to get people. And it's right, we all know that. You hear a joke, you laugh, you forget a little bit about whatever tensions you've had. So the topic today, the eternal now, was hard finding a joke. You know, sometimes these emails go around because everywhere all over Ananda, anybody who's giving a Sunday service, they're giving this Sunday service. People go, hey, did you find a good joke? Then I imagine all over the world, people listening to the same joke, laughing at the same time. But I couldn't find a joke. So, so I opened the Raja Yoga book to start preparing for this sermon yesterday morning because the final chapter in our Raja Yoga class, which is called the Yogic Scheme of Life, it's about this. And this is very hard to talk about. And in the very first paragraph of that chapter, Swamiji writes, this teaching, he says, that he's about to give, he says this, is of all the yogic teachings, the hardest for the human intellect to grasp. That's the first thing I read yesterday, and I said to myself, oh boy, that is not funny. It's the hardest to grasp. So for Swamiji, I worked hard at this, so I'm going to tell you a joke. God's sitting in heaven, and he's just waiting for people to come before him, and it's obviously God sitting there, looking all royal and godlike. And this man comes up, clearly having worked hard to get there, big backpack on him, a lot of weight. This man has been through a lot in this life. And he sits down, and it's just drawn so beautifully. You can just see he's just waiting for these words of wisdom. So God says to him, practice stillness as much as you can. And then there's a pause. And he says, practice mindfulness. And then there's a pause. And then he says, always. And all of a sudden you see God's pocket starts vibrating. And he says, hold it, I have to take this. Come on, that was a good joke. It's about how hard it is to be there now. What Swamiji was talking about when he said this particular teaching that he was going to cover in the last chapter being the hardest for the human intellect to grasp is really made of two parts. The first part is that this divine consciousness did not create us, but when it was in a place of perfect stillness, and it was, if you will, all that existed, it manifested us. It literally became us. And not just us, but every single thing that we see, that we hold to be true in this material world. The Kabbalists have a beautiful way of explaining this, the Kabbalist Jewish understanding of this. They teach it that God became an infinite number of sparkles, and those sparkles went out and just became everything that we know, which is just such a beautiful image because it carries with it the light. But that is what the yogis teach also, that God became us. And in that becoming, nothing was lost. He didn't become what he was, forgive me for that, but that consciousness did not become what it was manifesting, but it became everything. So that whether we're talking about love, joy, peace, harmony, or whether we're talking about anger, greed, selfishness, it's all a perfect manifestation of the divine. And the second part of that teaching is that the whole concept of time and space is a delusion. There is really no such thing as time or space, but rather that's a concept of our mind. Now, there's no way for any of us to understand that until we begin to have an experience of being in the eternal now. Once you experience it, you know it. But for most of us, where I assume at least many of us are, there's no words to put around that to be able to teach that, which is why Swamiji said the human intellect. That's the truth. And for most of us, from the instant that we were born, everything has been presented to us in terms of time and space. Everything. When we eat, when we get our diaper changed, when we go to school, every single thing that happens is on this linear notion of time and space. It's really drummed into us. If we do well in this world, we become very logical. Every single thing is explained on a past or now or future, over there or over here. When you start paying attention to it, you realize it is our whole reality. How are we going to break that down in our mind? Because whenever we go to talk about the eternal now, this one thing, state that truly exists, this place of absolute, utter stillness and pure love at the heart of everything. Nothing ever changes. So that if we can dive deeply enough into ourselves or into any experience ever to that place of perfect stillness, we realize the divine. But we've been totally conditioned away from that. And as we all know, it's extremely difficult to get out of our mind. There's many stories about this, but there was a disciple of Ramakrishna who went to see him in India, and she was a woman who had been a disciple for a long time. She lived in England, and when she got there, the first thing she wanted to tell him is everything about her journey and how hard it had been, going from England to India. And he just listened, and then very sweetly and with total calmness said to her, "You haven't gone anywhere. You haven't left anywhere." And he just let her sit with that. When Swamiji went to see Ananda Ma, this great Indian saint, and right before he was leaving, he said to her, "Ma, so many devotees have asked me to ask you, will you please come to India?" And she said, to America, excuse me. And she just looked at him and said to him, "I'm already there." Holding constantly this understanding that there is no time, is no space, that these great ones know that we are everywhere in everything. As our reading said, God is as much in us, of us now, as he will ever be. It's us that have left. We have placed this notion of time in our mind, and we hold fast to it. But time is simply a conception of ours. And we actually know that if we think about it. Because if you realize if you're out doing something, you're on the best vacation of your life, and you have 7 days, and you keep saying, "Oh, I hope this will last forever." What happens? It goes by in a heartbeat. You wake up one morning and you have to go home. And you say, where did all the time go? But if you tried to spend that same exact period of time in pain After a surgery, suffering a loss, time just feels interminably long. Time only exists in our mind, and we, in our mind, continue to believe that we live in a physical world. And herein lies the whole huge misconception that creates all of the confusion for us, because we are not physical beings. We are beings of consciousness. That was the first line. God manifested us. We are pure consciousness. So that time does not exist in pure consciousness. It only exists in our mind, which is a part of that consciousness. So time and space live within that consciousness, but we cannot live in it outside of that. It's a very confusing and difficult, but ultimately the truth. This is wisdom. This is the definition of wisdom, is the realization that everything we want or need already exists within us because we are everything. I've had many experiences now, I will say, that have convinced me over the years of some of these truths that I don't feel I can find exactly the right words for, but I want to share one of them with you. Many years ago, I was driving over to Oakland to have satsang with a spiritual teacher. I used to go very often when I was done with work, 10, 11, 12 at night. I was driving up Route 880, and as many of you know, it's a huge freeway, a lot of lanes, everybody going too fast. And all of a sudden, right in front of my eyes, it's 11 o'clock at night, pitch dark, this car comes over and slams this other car. The car that was right in front of me, and we're all doing 70, 75 miles an hour. And the car in front of me starts spinning like this. And for 2 rotations, when the car is facing me, I'm looking right in this woman's eyes. She's in a state of disbelief and terror beyond words, but she's staring at me, and I'm driving my car. And then she spins again. This is an absolutely true story. And again, she's looking right at me. And I, for a moment, literally just start chanting Om, just that quickly. These are milliseconds that go by. The next thing I know, I'm on the other side of the accident. I see it all in my rearview mirror. Whole freeway shut down. We all read about it the next day. And I'm driving up 880 to Oakland. When I walk into the house to see this teacher, he comes up to me and he says to me, "Shanti Ma, so good to see you. That was a close call, wasn't it?" And, you know, what do you do with something like that? Literally, I walk in the door and he says that. Close call, wasn't it? That was one of the first times, not the very first, but one of the first times where I started saying to myself, there is so much more going on than we know about. There is so much happening on levels that we don't begin to understand. And very much like the reading said, both in our affirmation and in our reading, it is our job to open ourselves to that reality, because that reality doesn't quit being. It is always there. That's how these great teachers know that it was a close call. He was sitting in his home. How could that be? And so many more stories like that, because they are living in this still, quiet moment of absolute, utter stillness. This comment in our reading about lifting up our eyes. Why do we do that, really? Sri Yukteswar explains a lot of this, and I won't go into it, but in our lower chakras, at the base of our spine, if the rate of vibration in that lowest chakra is 10,000 units, as you come up each chakra, it lowers, it calms, until you get up to the center of Christ consciousness, where there is, once again, instead of this, utter stillness. Our job is to transform our consciousness, which then changes our conception of time so that we can be in the moment. There's a beautiful reading in Whispers. I only remember a couple of lines of it, but it says, "Beneath all tumult," Master says, "lies pure peace. Beneath all noise lies pure silence." Yesterday, I had some friends who stopped by to visit me, and in the course of the conversation, something came up that just was troubling to me. It just troubled me. It was just some human interaction, not about my friends, but it really set me off. And when they left, it was a little bit of a joke that I was trying to be in the now. I was nowhere near the now. You know, Joe Tish has this wonderful image that he puts out a lot of a table that has a lot of feathers on it, and there's a fan. And he says, what we do most of the time in life is we try and keep all the feathers on the table, as opposed to reaching up and turning down or off the fan. Of course, it's an impossible job. So I said to myself, how are you going to turn down the fan? And that's when that line from Whispers came to me. Beneath all tumult lies pure peace. And I said to myself, you know, Master didn't just say that like occasionally there's peace there. He said, beneath every tumult. And I just sat at my altar and just kept repeating that and repeating it and repeating it until it worked, until I could get back to a place of, and I'm telling you, more than I'm wanting to show you when I'm up here giving the sermon, was a state of pure agitation and pain to a state of pure peace, and being able to come back to that. But we have to find our way back. You know, Yogananda came in this very restless time, specifically in this time for a very specific reason. And one of the things that he said loud and clear is the time for knowing God has come. He said that. He didn't say, if you get around to it, if you have nothing better to do, maybe it'll come to some and not to others. He very clearly said, the time for knowing God has come. Our job is to do what we need to do to lift these veils of delusion that we live with so that we can see clearly to the heart of everything. We don't have to learn anything. All we need to do is lift the veils of delusion and remember. And it's so much easier than having to learn it all. Study the sutras, study the scriptures, study this, study that. We don't even have to, because we've all probably been saved in a moment or referred to a moment as grace when we weren't even looking for it. But we're just living ever more constantly in a way to bring ourselves in tune with that truth. Maria McSweeney has a wonderful line. She calls all of our practices time and space annihilators. And it's just so perfect. That's how easy it is. All of the practices, all you need to do is do it. You know, this week I gave a talk at East West Bookstore. It was adorable. Everybody was very present. It was a great experience being with them. But somebody asked me a question near the end. I don't know what it was, but I said to them, look, everything we've heard here tonight is the truth. Everything's important. But here's the point. You actually have to go out and practice. And literally, to the person, I just watched them, they went, ah. Oh. You know, it's like, no, it won't come to you through some intravenous. I think they came because I was a doctor and they were hoping I had the magic pill. I really did but nobody wants to understand what the magic pill is. They want it to be more magic. But alas, most of us are not masters. So if we remember, we do our practices exactly as they've been given to us by Master, then we align ourselves with these teachings. We not only remember that beneath all tumult is pure peace, we begin to live more and more from that place that is called the eternal now, that resides within every one of us, and we begin to know it.